Hey y'all, my name is Mr. Chow and welcome to Chow Time. For those of you who have been following the channel, you'll know that this is my first review since the state of the collection, and that means that this is a new phase of the channel and the reviews, because now I'm not reviewing watches that I've purchased or that I want, and I'm just reviewing watches for the sake of reviewing watches now. And so this week, the review is on the Pagani Design BB58 homage, depending on where you look at it. On AliExpress, it says BB58. On Amazon, it says Black Bay homage. So whatever you want to call it, I don't think they care. So the way I review watches is by objectively comparing them against a set of criteria that I've defined. Things such as the case and bracelet, the movement, the dial, and also I do a more subjective rating on the heritage, brand, and prestige to get a total score. Then I apply a value multiplier that helps give me a value score. Then I take the two scores and I rate them, I rank them against all the other watches I've reviewed thus far. If you'd like to know more about how this works, there is a video in the top right hand corner, and there's also the links to the rubric and rankings down below. After the review, I give a completely subjective opinion, my take on the watch based on my personal preferences, my emotions, my attachment to the watch, these kinds of things that are more closely aligned to how I make my watch buying decisions, and I believe how everyone makes their watch buying decisions. Before we can begin scoring the watch against the rubric, we first have to understand where the watch comes from, what design language inspires it, what the purpose of the watch is, that kind of thing. And so this watch is a kind of a fashion watch for watch enthusiasts. It's a homage. It basically tries to copy another watch for the sake of having that option, but at a much cheaper price. I have lots to say about this watch, so let's get to it. We'll start with the function, feel, and visual appeal of the case and bracelet. This 316L stainless steel case very closely resembles the 41mm Black Bay case. I don't have one on hand, but I've held them and it's pretty close. The side case brushing is pretty on point, but the straight brushing on the lugs lacks definition here on the top, as you can see. It's pretty difficult to discern what direction it's going. The polished chamfer is okay, but it does not hold up under close scrutiny. There are leftover machine marks throughout. The bezel is coin-edged and very easy to grip, but the machining here is also letting it down. Whenever the bezel brushes up against my clothing, you can feel it scratching and tearing away at the fabric, like it's Velcro. This will go away over time, and is already much better on my watch after only a month of active wear. The bezel insert is aluminum and looks like it's painted, although it could be anodized. The bezel action is a little hollow sounding, but actually feels very nice and well defined with crisp stops. It's pretty well aligned, which is good. There is a bezel pip, just like the original. The crystal is sapphire, or at least it's advertised as such. I have no way of testing it, but I've seen YouTubers verify it with a thermal conductivity probe. The crown is well sized and easy to grip, and by all appearances very nice, but is also disappointing. The red ring appears to be a crown tube, but is actually part of the crown, and is only there for show. When unscrewing the crown, there is a disconcerting grinding, as the interior surfaces are not finished in any way, or at least that's what it feels like to me. I fear that as I screw the crown in and out to wind it or set the time, that there are metal shavings accumulating and entering the case and finding a home on the movement on the lubricated surfaces. I wonder about how the impact of the low quality case components will have on the movement over time. Anyhow, the screw-in crown does afford the watch 100 meters of water resistance. Let it be known that I have my doubts about the diving ability though. And finally, the bracelet. It has all the specs that one would look for when checking the wish list. Solid end links with a recessed first link, screwed pins for adjusting the bracelet length, a push button scissor clasp, milled clasp parts, some micro adjust positions, and a diver's extension. However, it's all just for show. As you can see, some of the links don't really articulate because the tolerances are so poor. It has faux mid links and is covered in sharp edges. Speaking of sharp edges, the underside of the case also has some sharp edges. Finally, when I did a quick search on the forums and such, quality control issues are abundant. Most people quickly retort that this is what you get for the price, but I'll address that later in the video. In summary, the design is stolen, and all the touch points are a little bit dodgy. 5 out of 10 for form, 4 out of 10 for function. Let's move on to that dial. I got the gilt dial, which makes the dial material quality much easier to spot. The rose gold is painted on, or I'm not really sure how it's applied on actually, but it is flaking off already, as you can see here on some of the applied indices. These little pieces of plastic, or whatever they are, will also likely find their way into the movement. Unfortunately, you don't even need a loupe to be able to spot the issue. I suppose I should mention that the watch came to me in the mail like this. The lume in the indices and hands glow fairly bright and evenly, but do not last very long. I cannot read the watch at 3 AM, which is about 4 hours after the last time I charged the dial with a UV light. The waffle texture on the dial is nice though, and has no flaws that I could spot. The print is crisp, but has some bubbles in it, where you can see the dial showing underneath. The best part of this dial is the legibility and uncluttered design. When I look down at the watch, it's always very easy to tell the time, and that goes a long way in making a watch a nice experience. 5 out of 10 for form, 6 out of 10 for function. Let's move on to the movement for this watch, which is a bit of a highlight, which is unfortunate because it's the only component that's not produced in China. The NH35 movement is extremely reliable and cheap to replace. It hacks and hand winds and has a date complication. It has a 48-hour power reserve and beats at 21,600 beats per hour. The movement is a known quantity and lends the watch an illusion of durability and toughness. However, as I mentioned before, the case and dial could be shortening the life of the movement. If you are an amateur or hobbyist watchmaker, I imagine a cleaning and oiling of the movement would be beneficial, especially after the first few months of owning the watch. 4 points out of 10 for form, 3 out of 10 for function. That brings us to 27 out of 60 so far in our objective categories. Let's move on to our more subjective category, the heritage, brand, and prestige. I'm not really sure what to say here, as the brand is very new, sprouting up along with 100 other Chinese mushroom companies. They are generally well liked by those who buy them. Their target audience seems to be watch fans who are mostly interested in style and fashion, do not want to spend too much money, and like to have a variety of watches to wear. The brand is polarizing, with some who love wearing homage watches for a tiny fraction of the original price, while others won't even entertain putting one on. I'd have to say I was genuinely curious about these Chinese watches at this price point myself. Still, with so much negativity around these types of brands, the lack of any kind of history, and being completely unknown by the general public, I'll have to give Pagani Design a 2 out of 10 for brand heritage and prestige, bringing us to 29 out of 70 for our total score. This watch was released sometime this year and sells on AliExpress between $110 and $160. I'll use 150, which means the value multiplier will be 1.86, the highest value multiplier yet on the channel. The value score is 53.94, which blows my mind a little bit. It makes me feel like I should tweak the value multiplier. We'll see. This places the watch dead last in total score. To be fair though, it's also the cheapest watch so far, but I think it will not hold that distinction for long. The value score sees it coming in at 12th place, edging the Panerai Luminor. So that brings me to my personal opinion on this watch. And I'd like to just jump straight into the value proposition discussion. Yes, it's a very cheap watch, and it does offer a ton of specs for the price, but I don't think it's worth it. And that's because at the end of the day, it is very cheaply made. And it is cheaply made because they had to spend their budget on the specs, essentially. Having to have the solid end link, the screw pins, especially the sapphire crystal. The box sapphire crystal, I believe, probably adds more to the value of the watch than anything else, to be honest. But the user experience suffers so much because of that, because of the low quality and the high spec list, that it makes it not worth it for me. For $150 or thereabouts, you can get very low-end Seiko or Casio, and to me those watches have a better user experience even if you're not getting quite the same specs. And if all you're doing is chasing the specs, then I suppose that this is the kind of watch for you. And you know, the watch does have some amazing reviews on websites like Amazon and also on YouTube. But for me, I'm not necessarily chasing the specs. I love that this watch is able to give you so much. But at the end of the day, the quality is so poor, and the touch points are I'll just put it this way. Screwing in the crown is like nails on chalkboard. And I know a lot of the younger viewers don't know what a chalkboard is, or if they know what it is, they don't know what that sounds like. But it really gets under your skin, and the crown feels like that for me. When I am unscrewing it or screwing it in, it's just such a negative experience that I can't really overlook it. To me, I think that the Pagani Design is like a fashion watch, but for watch nerds. It gives you the look, it gives you a very impressive spec list, and it does it at this crazy rock bottom price. And who doesn't want that? You know, everyone wants, not everyone, but the people who can't really afford to go and buy a bunch of luxury watches love to be able to kind of try out the look and feel, but for it to be at a price that, you know, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, it's fine. And it just reminds me of like a Daniel Wellington for someone who's just into fashion accessories, you know, someone who, or whatever the brand is these days, Philip Loretti, or I don't know, there's all these brands, right, that People like to buy these watches because they like to have something on their wrist that looks nice, and nothing else really matters to them. And for them, the life of the watch may only be a year or two before they just kind of like throw it in a drawer and forget about it. And I feel like this is the same kind of thing, but for watch people. And at the end of the day, that's kind of what gets to me, is that it feels like it's a watch that is just made for appearances. It has the spec list, it looks the part, but all of that is just like the front-facing stuff. It's the things that are immediately noticed, but you know, when you peek behind the covers a little bit, it just kind of falls apart. And so it's a little bit like it's a facade of a watch. And I just want to say one last thing. All of the things on the spec list, they're things that generally make people think that something is of a higher quality. With the exception of the sapphire crystal, if it is indeed sapphire, that is a high quality item, right? But solid end links are something that indicates a high quality or a higher quality watch. The screw down crown is something that indicates a higher quality. But for example, the end link, while it's better than a hollow end link, and you would think that the bracelet would be better because of that, what good is that if the links don't articulate? And the screw down crown, usually the screw down crown lets you know that the watch is of a higher quality. But first of all, there are 100 meter water resistant watches that don't have a screw down crown. And what good is a screw down crown if it doesn't really do anything more than a push down crown, and it is potentially damaging the movement when you're screwing it in and out. So what is the purpose of having these specs if the specs don't really actually indicate the quality that the specs usually would? And so this kind of makes me that's why I'm rethinking how the rubric works and how the value indicator works. So we'll see how this all goes. So, do you agree with the scoring of the watch? Is there anything that you would change about the rubric? Is there any content that you would like for me to make? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for making it to the end. Bye, y'all.